Have you ever been up before sunrise in early winter and looked over toward the east-southeast sky and noticed the return of the brightest of all planets, Venus? Well, it's also called the morning star. During the winter holidays, it shines like a modern-day Christmas star in the east before sunrise. Well, this morning star quilt is also exceptionally bright in rich holiday colors. Well, the star points are scarlet red and they are perfect. As well as star points, they are also called flying geese patches. Well, the star centers are 4.5-inch squares of flowers and they're fussy cut with our new ruler. And then joining the stars together are the chain blocks, which are just quickly strip-pieced. Well, my cousin Carol Ann did the beautiful long arm quilting. Well, she did stippling around the blocks, and then she did holly leaves in the center and chain blocks. Oh, they're just great. Now you can especially see her gorgeous feather work in the border. Now it's the same background fabric as in the blocks. Well, I made the border wide enough to fit stars on the corners. It's just beautiful. Well, Sharon Clevin made this table runner for her friend, Mary Ann. It's her birthday gift. Well, she did a perfect job lining the rich red stars and the black chain blocks with Stitch in the Ditch. And then she did free motion quilting around the center flowers and also in the gray background. Well, Mary Ann's kitchen has white cabinets and gray countertops. So this table runner will be a perfect gift, and won't she be surprised? This wall hanging was made by another of my students, Adela Cobb. Now, can you believe her middle name is Morning Star? She wanted to take my class so desperately, she showed up with nothing, not a stitch of fabric or a tool. But you can see she did just a great job. Her points are very perky and all her seams match. Her long arm quilter, Mary Sibilia, did an overall pattern. It's wonderful. Now, Adela is a member of the Soboba Indian tribe and lives on the Lucena Reservation here in Southern California. Well, as a child, she was told by her elders to pray to the morning star at daylight because that is when her creator was closest to her and could hear her prayers. So the name Morning Star is seeped in tradition. A quote from the Bible says, "Winter's end is when the day dawns and the morning star arises." Well, this is our last quilt for winter, the beautiful morning star with 5 star blocks and 4 chain blocks. We're still using the cheery reds, with a fussy cut center, and this time country check in green. It's wonderful. Now, so the patchwork doesn't touch the border. We've added some border rectangles around the outside edge. And then just take a look at this stripe. Well, it looks like I spent hours getting that little narrow stripe right in there, but it's actually just a piece of the fabric. And the last thing I want to do is show you how to make perfect mitered corners. Well, we're going to start out with the chain blocks. Easy to do, just 4 of them. Comes from strips. There are 2 different parts to it right here. This is section 1 on both sides. They're identical with 2.5-inch strips and a 4.5-inch background. And then section 2, the very middle, 4.5-inch in the middle, dark green, and then 2.5-inch background on both sides. Well, I just couldn't resist. I started going on my strips. Now, for a wall hanging, you need to have a whole set of strips. 3, 1 on each side of that background. Now, usually you press your seams to the dark, but you want your seams to lock perfectly on this, between the star block on the chain block. So this time you press towards the background. So place the background on the top, line up the strip with the lines on the grid. Just set the seam. How about a little steam? Oh, I'm 1 for steam. And then once you set the seam, just lift it open and press right into the green. Oh, make sure there aren't any folds. Always use my fingers to kind of lead it. Now, again, seam towards the background, so turn the whole strip over and set the seam and then lift it up. Whatever you want the seam to go towards, you put that seam on top. Well, remember this. It's so hard to do. You just always want to go towards the dark, but it's different this time. Now, I'm going to just layer these up. Oh, I need 16 2.5-inch segments. So let me move everything out of the way and stack these up. Go ahead and stagger them so you can layer cut. Well, the tool that I like to use is this one. It just cuts so quickly. And you know how you're just cutting along and suddenly you forget your measurements. Well, I've helped myself out by putting orange at 2.5 inches, and then I did the pink at the 4.5. You know, somebody will walk into the room and you're completely lost. So right here I'm at 0. You always take and just square off the left end. The line is lined up with the strip, so I'm looking for orange. All right, 2.5, 5, 7.5, 10. The advantage of this is that you don't have to pick up your ruler and move it every time. Perfect. Oh, kept on talking, didn't mess it up once. So you've got that squared off end, got a little bit extra here. I'm going to get rid of that. Now this is enough for both my chain blocks and my outside rectangle. So I'm just going to stack these up. I'll get back to those and set those aside. Now, section 2 has that 4.5 inch in the middle, 2.5 inch on the outside. These are 4.5 inch segments. So this time, oh my gosh, I'm going to follow my pink tape marks. Oh, I better make sure pink. So always square off on the end and then 4.5, 9. Oh my gosh, then it gets tricky. 13.5, 18, zipping right along. Take this, get rid of it. Yay, and this is going to go right in the middle. Now, I did use Scrappy, so I want to make sure I don't have the same pieces right across from each other. Stack these up. It's going right in the middle. Now, I'm going to just take one of these and flip it right sides together. And because we press the seams towards the background, you can see, look at that. Those are just going to lock together perfectly. And I just kind of pull my fingers together so they lock in place. And it's really easy to just zip along here an assembly line, so them always checking, making sure that they're locked. And then I always wonder, you know, how much attention we pay to those perfect seams. And then it seems once you finish your quilt, you never even notice if they're like a 1/16 of an inch off. And oh boy, my policy is never to point out where they're not exactly perfect. Hey, cut that. Let's just check and see. I'm going to see. All right, look at that. Great match. Now I need one for the opposite side. And let's make sure we have the check. Okay, we've got the check, kind of catty corner. Flip it right sides together. Lock that seam together. This time, the seam on the top is going up, and that is the best way. When the top seam goes up and underneath goes down, that way as you're sewing right into the seam, it just shoves that top seam into the bottom, and it's a perfect lock. Now, we're continuing those locking seams on these chain blocks. So once you're finished, I want you to just press the seams that you just did, press them into the center, and we're done with the chain block. I think my sister Patty coined the word fussy cut. It's like this, like fussy cut, because when we were growing up, my mom called her the princess. But you know, Patty and I are great friends, And together, we came up with this new ruler for fussy cutting. Well, a fussy cut is whenever the flower is right in the very center of the square. Now, this is a 4.5-inch square. You can see how that's perfectly lined up right inside. Well, this is what the fussy cut ruler looks like. It has an X right through the middle, and that's got 1/4-inch seams drawn around the outside edge and little marks right in the center. Well, normally a ruler would just slide all around. It's a little tough when you're cutting. So I have this clear plastic that I like to put on the bottom side of the ruler so it doesn't slide. You cut the plastic just a little bit smaller than the ruler and then spread it right on top. Now, this is the flower that I want to get right here. So you put the X right in the very center of the arrangement. And then all you have to do, see the ruler doesn't slide, then all you have to do is just cut around it on all 4 sides. And I put it on a turnable so I don't even have to pick it up. One more turn right here and just cut it along there. Now, if I wanted to get this very same flower on the other spot, I'm going to take a second piece of this clear plastic, place it right on the top side. Oh, we're using both sides here. Smooth it down, and then with a permanent marking pen, then just quickly trace the outline of the flower. So you have the shape that when you put it back down again, you can line up these lines. That way, you can have the identical flower over and over again. Okay, so let me just take this piece. I've got my lines drawn on here, and I'm just going right to this spot. So you just lay it down like this. Let me turn it so that it's right there, just like that. So you can cut out. Every single flower will be identical in the quilt. I'm going to show you how to make the perkiest star points ever. Just out of 2 squares, we're going to end up with the 4 points around that star center. Now, this part right here, this square is actually a 5.5-inch square, and that's going to end up in that part of all 4 points. This one is a 7-inch square, and it's going to be these 2 parts of the star. So, let's get going. Just put the larger one on the bottom. Put the smaller one right sides together to it and center it right in the very middle. And just kind of eyeball it. You can measure it, but eyeballing does just as good too, because these are oversized. We're going to square them up to perfect in the end. So just draw a line corner to corner on the diagonal. Now we're going to sew 1/4 inch from this seam. So hopefully you have a 1/4-inch foot on your machine, something that will help you guide that. But again, it is a little oversized. If it's not absolutely perfect, it'll be fine. Now I sewed down 1/4 inch from one side of the line. On one, you can just pick it up, turn it around, and sew down the other side. If you're assembly line sewing, just keep a whole train of them going along there. Well, that's the sewing for the first step. 1/4-inch seam on both sides of that line. So the distance in between should be a 1/2 inch. Okay, just take your ruler and cut on that diagonal line. Now this is going to be pretty amazing. 4 stars. Okay, doesn't matter about light, background, or dark. We're going to turn them over so that the large triangle is on the top. And then just open up that large triangle. Oh, I'm using my wooden iron because I can get a pretty good crease just going right in along there. Take the second one, do the same thing. Just open it up, crease along there. These are the strangest looking pieces. But now they go back together, right sides together, opposite fabrics together. Now, look, you don't line up that seam. That's the best part. But you do line up the outside edges. So kind of eyeball that. You've got your flying geese tails right out there. Look for those. Okay, and then you just take your pencil and draw another diagonal line right down through. Okay, I usually start in the center and go out one way, down the other. And this is the same technique you go back to sewing a 1/4 inch from each side of that line. Let me just drop that right on there. Now the tricky part is the seams, and you want to be careful that they don't flip underneath. So I'm just going to hold that down on both sides, hold it down on the other side, and once again just whip it around. So back up the other side. Now I know there are a lot of different methods for making geese, but this one has very little waste, and it's also all on the straight of grain. You don't get those bias edges that may distort you. Okay, let us see. We've got that diagonal line down through there. Give it a cut right through the middle and take a look. Well, your first reaction is to say, oh my gosh, I've goofed, look at that. But if you take it and fold it like this, you're going to see that you have one star point patch. And this one here. And then over on the other side, you have exactly the same thing. They're called flying geese or star patches. Now, I want to press the seam away from this beige. And when you do that, you get that twist right in the middle. So that we don't get that twist, just take your piece, fold it in half, and clip to the stitches. Just repeat with the second one, match those tails right down there, and clip to the stitches. Now I like to use my wooden iron to press the seam I have not pressed yet. This one's already done, so I'm going to go right to here, just press in this way, turn it around, hold that edge up, and press in to the other side so that when you look on the back, right where you clipped, you can see those seams going in opposite directions. Well, the geese ruler comes next. These pieces are squared up to 2.5 inches by 4.5 inches. There's a red line on the ruler. I'm just going to slide that right in there. Now, if you don't have a geese ruler, you square it up to 2.5 inches by 4.5, and I just trim off on that side. Well, now I want to just tip up my ruler and turn the patch. You can do this with just regular rulers, but make sure you keep your 1/4 inch seam right down there, and then your tips, the points go right out to here, right out to the corners of the seams. And just take this little bit and get rid of it. Well, out of these pieces, you're going to get 4 parts for your star. So let's go back to that 4.5 inch fussy cut center, and we're just going to take the 4 star points from the geese patches, put them around the outside edge, and then you have 2.5 inch background squares that go in each one of the corners. And that is the way the star goes together. Now when I sew it, I do vertical rows. I always take this row and flip it right sides together to the left and just stack it up. I'm going to sew straight down, so just stack it up so you have one stack right at your sewing machine. And just line up those seams and sew a vertical row straight down. Do assembly line sewing. Now, this star is known by so many different names. Oh my gosh. It is the morning star, but it's also the evening star. You heard that one. And I just love the descriptive name that was given to it also. It was called Square and Points. Well, how easy could that be? And it's also known as a sawtooth star. I think it is definitely one of the most popular stars made. Okay, so we did that whole vertical row going top to bottom. Let's just take a look, open it up like this, check. You want to make sure it's nice and crisp right there. And then all we do is go back down along the opposite way. Now, when you go across, let me show you on this one. When you go across the other way, you press your seams away from the points, so that they actually just lock together. Ooh, looking good. And then for that final seam, you press them away from the center. Let me finish my stars. No stargazing for me. I have all 5 stars done. They're pressed. I laid out the 5 stars with the 4 chain blocks. And so you have that beautiful center of the quilt. Now to continue that chain design, I'm taking that section 1 that I made earlier from the chain blocks. On both sides of the star, you place those section 1s. The corner is just a 2.5-inch background square, just to fill that out. Now beside the chain block, you need a 2.5-inch by 8.5-inch, just a plain strip, or whatever size your block is. Right down here, we have the star, so I'm just going to go ahead and push in that part of the chain. Now we've been working on those locking seams. So whenever we sew the vertical rows together, when we flip them, remember the star seams, the last seams went out, and then the chain seams went in. So they are going to lock together, and it's going to be great. Well, I'm going to sew this top together as quick as I can, and then I'll show you the miter. Up to this point, I have spent less than an hour sewing the top together and adding 2 stripes. Well, I have 2 more stripes to add, and this is how you do the math to get the length of your stripe. First of all, measure the side, find out what that is, and then measure whatever the width of the stripe is at about 3 inches. Well, multiply that by 2 so that you have it for both ends. Now, this is about 6 inches. So I added 3 inches, 9 inches, 9 times 2. This whole piece is 18 inches longer. So take, fold it in half, find the center, and then just pin the center to the very center of the top and work to the outside edge. Well, the most important part is right here in this corner because you have to stop 1/4 inch in from the end. That's what you really need to do. You need that 1/4 inch. Well, I did 2 sides already, and I can show you how to lay out the miter on your pressing mat so you just get this great look. You just lay it out and press your seam away from the stripe, and then take one of the stripes, usually the top stripe, turn it under at a 45-degree angle, and you can look and see on the top side what it looks like. Now, I like to fold these back right here, get those stripes all lined up, and then look at it from the right side. You can see if those stripes are all lined up. It's looking good. And then just set that seam. Now, usually check and make sure that it's a perfect 45-degree angle going up there. Well, once you press that crease in, that is actually your stitching line. So let me just take and put some pins in right through all of the stripes. Let me just look at the crease, fold back. Ooh, it's looking good. And this is the line that you stitch on. So make sure you fold the quilt completely out of the way. And ooh, this is the critical part. You got to get everything back out of the way so that you can start your stitching right on that 1/4 inch mark. Okay, needle down. Let's see how I do. Stitch right along the markings, the fold that you put in, and make sure you've got those pinned in on the stripes. Ooh, I get to take a look first. See how I did. Okay, open it up. Ooh, looking good. Pretty good. Think it's good enough to show you. Okay, that's what the corner looks like, just like that. And then the last step is just to fold this corner back, take your ruler and your cutter, put your 1/4 inch line on the stitching, and then just trim away the extra, get rid of that, and this seam gets pressed open and flat. Now you're just going to repeat that on all 4 corners. Look how good that looks, laying flat. Perfect right in here. Works great. Oh my gosh, look from the front side. Just beautiful. Well, if the goddess Venus were here today, I just know she would enjoy making quilts. So be a Venus yourself. Just bring love and beauty into your home through your quilts.